Well, this is one of the more challenging things for us to think about when it comes to what happens after we become Christians. Romans 6:5-11 says, "Since we've been united with him in his death, we'll also be raised to life as he was. We know that our old sinful selves were crucified with Christ so that sin might lose its power in our lives. We're no longer slaves to sin." A reasonable person would ask, well, if that's true, then why do we still sin? Why do we still sin? If we're free from its power, why do we still sin? That's a pretty complicated answer. Number one, we still have free will. We still have the capacity to sin, but what Paul is really talking about here in Romans, we're not bound by that sin. We don't have to sin. We can make the choice to live a more holy life. We can pursue that. We talked about this quite a bit last night in our Tuesday night small group in our house. And I just want to sidebar this. If you're not in a small group, if you're not in a Bible study with other Christians, I just really want to recommend that you do that. I said this a couple weeks ago, we don't have 4-hour sermons at Westway yet. I don't know that we'll ever have 4-hour sermons. We don't have 4-hour sermons at Westway yet. So we can't talk about every single thing. We also don't have 4-hour small groups. But small groups allows you to ask questions. And one of the questions that we spent quite a bit of time on last night in our study time together was, why then do we still sin? And part of the answer is there's free will. And I think the question for us is before and after we become Christians. Before we become Christians, our bent, the most common feature in our lives is our pursuit of selfishness, is our pursuit of sinfulness, is wanting to go our own way, wanting to be separated from God. This is Ephesians chapter 2. We also talked about that quite a bit last night. Before we become Christians, the normal behavior of our lives is to pursue self. And after we become followers of Christ, the normal bent, the normal pursuit of our lives is to live as Jesus lived. That doesn't mean that every once in a while we're not going to sin, because every once in a while we are going to sin. But the arc of our life is sort of up and to the right. We're moving towards Christ likeness, and it will probably look like this. It won't be this as much as we want it to be that. But the arc and the orientation of our lives after we become a follower of Christ is that we're pursuing holiness. We're pursuing things that bring God honor, that bring God glory. And we don't do that under our own strength. We do that because we've been transformed. So the real question for us to ask ourselves is, if there hasn't been any transformation, if I don't want to be more Christ-like in my life, then the exchange that we talked about on Sunday, and we'll cover this in more detail on Friday. But if that exchange hasn't taken place, if we don't see any evidence of transformation, then it is possible that actually we're not Christians. If I don't desire more godliness in my life today than I did 5 years ago, or than I did 30 years ago before I became a follower of Christ, then the reality is I probably haven't become a follower of Christ. So am I living for myself, or am I living for Christ? Am I stuck in my old sinful ways? Note, I'm not saying, are we sinning? Do we sin? But earlier in Romans 6, Paul says, well, then should we keep on sinning? That's talking about a lifestyle of sin. So as we're kind of wrestling through this thought about what it means to be set free from the power of sin, is the balance on when we consider the balance of our lives, when we consider every aspect of our lives, Are we still pursuing a life of selfishness and a life of sin? Or are we pursuing selflessness and Christ? And each one of us has to answer that question. I think we kind of know, like we inherently know whether or not we're becoming more Christ-like by our pursuit of him, or we're becoming more us-like. And if we're simply pursuing our sin in the same old ways, then it is possible that an exchange was never made, that we have not been transformed. And this is what God calls us to. We have not been saved just so we can go to heaven when we die. We have been saved to live new lives. We have been saved to be new, to be different, and to pursue him. And this is really something I want you to wrestle with. It's not easy. Don't not wrestle with it because it's hard. But I do want you to wrestle with it. I want you to think that through. What am I pursuing in my life? And we are either pursuing ourselves or we are pursuing God. My hope and my prayer for you is that you will be pursuing new life in Christ. And you will demonstrate that by your thoughts, your words, and your deeds. Love you, praying with you, praying for you, and I'll talk to you again soon.